Well, hello, everybody.
Hello.
Did y'all get some lunch? Like your
Yes.
background, Liz. That's pretty cool.
Okay, my watercolor boats. That's right around me. How are you, gentlemen?
Did you do that with some electronic means?
Just my little old hand.
You have a screen, and do you have a screen?
Oh, Jackson, this is a green screen thing.
Oh yeah.
We have to get. You got to get. It's kind of fun, but it's a.
Liz, with you, everything's fun.
You got to have fun in life. It goes too fast, right?
Sure.
You can't take yourself too seriously, right?
That's for sure.
I'm gonna remember you said that, Liz.
Yeah, I was
Right.
thinking, don't I have a few more lives in reincarnation? I can have fun then.
Well, you can. Hey, listen. Why should the fun stop at one life?
Especially if you're a grasshopper.
I mean, think about living forever. You're going to have fun forever. Now, what could be more fun?
True.
I don't know if I could stand to be so happy. All right, Rich. Well, I'm going to just sit here and listen to what happens. I've got fireworks music on that I can put on any time.
Nice.
Just let me know if it's appropriate.
Sure. Yeah, so basically last time we were here, we were just discussing different things, as we always do, and it came up about the afterlife or everlasting life, and does that have anything to do with reincarnation or anything like that? So we decided to have a discussion about it today, and more of a discussion in the sense of obviously different points of view are going to be presented, but just trying to get everybody's input or questions and trying to go that route. I thought it would be good if we just, because one of the things when I was looking through some stuff throughout the week, one of the things that I noticed was that there's a difference maybe between what reincarnation would mean today in popular culture versus what it could have meant historically.
Yeah.
And so that's a big deal. So I just looked up, reincarnation, and basically the general basic foundation in U.S. English is the rebirth of a soul in a new body. The rebirth of a soul in a new body. So that's what we're talking about now. And in some of the ancient cases, that's what they're also talking about, especially even around the time of Yeshua and after. The people that did believe in reincarnation did take it to mean that at that time, or at least some of the groups did. I don't know, Liz might have more info on that. And but also it doesn't necessarily have to be a human body. It could be any body. It could be another animal, something like that. So the definition that we know of today is open. It doesn't have to be. Now, so I don't know, Liz, are you going to be using a different definition than that when you're talking about it?
Well, you know what? Let me jump. Well, can I say one thing?
Sure.
Because again, it's a huge topic. There's people are all over the place. You're not going to find a 100% cut and dried, but it has different names because if people are going to research this, so philosophically, it is called metapsychosis. That's sort of its philosophical name. In Greek, it's called palingenesia. And if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Jackson, palingenesia. Genesia is in Greek. It's reincarnation to the Buddhists or the Hindus, and that's probably the most popular culture one. It is in the Zohar, which is the Jewish mystical text, is referred to as the transmitigation of souls. And then in just generally Jewish, and I think this is where we're getting more into, it's Gilgal. It means of this Gilgal Neshama, the sphere, the transmitting soul.
The rolling of the soul.
Yeah. So it has a lot of names depending on where you're coming from. So should we stick with one name? Should we, just for the sake of clarity?
Well, I mean, I think in one point we do need to stick with one name. And so when people hear the term reincarnation out and about in the world, what does that mean? And then do they ascribe to that or not? I think that would be important, for the gist. But obviously, if we're talking about a subject that involves reincarnation as we know it, but it's got a little bit different twist, then we either explain that at that time or call it by something else and define it. So I would just be interested, because I know you've done a lot of research on this, Liz, to just kind of give a quick presentation, almost like an intro, as to what you're, I don't know if it's what you believe or what you're presenting and why you feel it's possibly legitimate.
Well, I don't, last week I just threw it out there. Listen, this is a deep subject. I have not studied it exhaustively. I do not have a horse, and I want to make clear, I don't have a horse in this race. Personally, I don't care what's true, just as long as I fear God and keep his commandments in this life. What happens next, I feel I feel like I'll be okay no matter what happens. So I don't feel it's something that we need to be dogmatic about or schism about or get all, anxious with each other about. But it is a very ancient and it is a very Hebraic subject matter. I mean, and just to give you, the quote I was talking about last week was from Antiquities, Josephus, and I'll read the three things he talks about with the three groups. Antiquities 18, and he talks about with the doctrine of the Essenes. They believe that all things are best described to God. They teach the immortality of the souls, and they do teach a doctrine of Gilgal. That is pretty accurately, you can ferret that out. He says the Sadducees' doctrine is that the soul dies with the body, so they have nothing to do with an afterlife. And then the Pharisees, he goes on to say, they also believe that souls have an immortal rigor or life in them, and that under the earth there will be rewards or punishments according as they have lived virtuously or viciously. And that the latter are to be detained in an everlasting prison, but that the former shall have power to revive and live again. So there again, you had three sects in Judaism, and they didn't even agree. So, But I think the what I studied the most in the Zohar, which is Jewish mystical writings. And just so you know, Rich, you don't know me, I do read a lot in the Zohar, and I'm talking strictly Jewish texts. I never read anything Hermetic. I never read anything occultic or New Age or from the. There are legitimate Hebraic texts that fall under the category called mysticism. So that in there, they're pretty. It's not even an issue. They talk all the time about the spheres, the rotations, Gilgal, this whole concept. So,
tell us about the term Gilgal. I know you say it's reincarnation, but what exactly does it mean?
All right, and this to me is an important concept, because to me these are Hebraic fundamentals. It's like if we were going to, little kids going to Torah school, these are fundamental principles or philosophy you would understand. It's the concept of the spheres, in the concept of rotation, of like the Mazzaroth revolves. It's a concept that nothing is really linear. It's all a revolution. So this is part of our big discussion about when you get into is mystery history. Well, because it can't totally, because there is a revolution. This is a Hebraic mindset. I'm not making this up. Everything is a revolution. So the week we go through one cycle, and then you start the cycle over again. I mean, that's the most fundamental understanding. It's all about a cycle. There are many ages, just like there's many years, there's many weeks. There is always many cycles, and souls fits into that concept. They cycle, they Gilgal.
Cycle.
Right.
Okay.
That would probably be the most.
Yeah, I posted a link there in the chat, just a basic Wikipedia link that describes it a little bit from the Hebraic standpoint. And, she's correct in the sense that that this is seen throughout Hebrew culture throughout the centuries. My pushback would be that, there's a whole swath of time when Hebrews were sacrificing their kids in the fire. It doesn't mean it's a legitimate thing that we should be doing. It's something that we shouldn't do. But to point to it saying that, hey, it was in the past, and so therefore this is legitimate and it's a part of it, and you would just learn this and this is how it should be. I don't know that that's necessarily, that's a non sequitur to say that this is how it should be. So I'm not saying it is illegitimate. I'm just saying from that perspective, I don't think that proves that it is legitimate, but I do agree with her that it is throughout, that certain groups have taught it. Now, for me and my the way I do everything is, Yeshua's words first, always. So I always go to his words to see if he has taught anything doctrinally about it. And that doesn't just mean canon proper, but other extra biblical texts that might purport to have Yeshua's words. I don't see anything doctrinally that he talks about it. The only thing that is mentioned by reincarnation groups concerning Yeshua, and it's out of every place I went, it's the only argument they all have, is the idea of attaching Malachi, saying that Elijah will come, and then Yeshua saying that John the Baptist is Elijah. So that's the one thing that a pro-reincarnation group would say. They would say, hey, he said he would return, and if you believe Yeshua's words, Yeshua says this is Elijah, so Elijah has been reincarnated into the body of John the Baptist. I'm sure you've heard of that before, Liz. Is that something you would say that is a legitimate possibility, or is that something you don't necessarily agree with?
Well, I think, and actually, in my opinion right now, we're putting a little bit of the, what do you call that, the cart before the horse, because in my opinion, there's two things that we probably could have talked about or should have established a little bit more in it, because we're talking about transmigration of souls. So ultimately, the question would be, is the soul immortal? I mean, because I think you guys were saying last week you didn't think. So if their soul is not immortal, then it's a moot point, right? Because, it just, that to me, because I would go back into the text that explain the soul, that it is, the Essenes is pretty clear. I think that the soul is immortal. So what happens to the soul when it leaves here? Okay, so then you would have, if you took the philosophy of that, and let's say you took the Essenes' opinion on that philosophy, and then you would interpret the text according to that. Like if you were looking at it from a Sadducee point of view, you wouldn't see anything in the philosophy because that was your presupposition.
Okay, so yeah, to clarify my understanding of the soul, and I think Jackson is similar, is that the soul is not made immortal, but can become immortal depending upon what one does in this life. Is that correct? For you, Jackson?
Yes, I think that there's a disconnect here in the Hebrew translation of Nephesh and Neshama. I think both of those are often translated either soul or spirit, whichever way the translator wants it to be. But no, I don't believe in the immortal soul idea, because in the Hebrew concept, the nephesh is both soul and body and inseparable. And several times at least in the Hebrew scriptures, it talks about the souls dying. All the souls in the sea died, or there are many, many texts. I can't quote any more than that. There's also some dichotomy I was reading in Philo, in that article I sent you, Liz, that the Hellenists distinguish between the souls of animals and the souls of people, that animals don't have any mind.
Right.
Further, they have to split that off.
Right.
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, and this is something, and this is a whole separate topic, but the thing is, see, this is what I say. This is my opinion, okay? And I think you know this. I believe that the House of Judah has the scriptures and they have the correct biblical exegesis. Okay, that was their role. They kept it. Their writings are there. They're pretty much all over the place, but we would have to go back to their writings. But in, again, the fundamentals of Jewish understanding on the words Nephesh, Neshama, Ruach, they talk that there are 5 levels of soul life. See, to them, we get back to the Hebrew word. So the Nephesh is the soul that's attached to the to our human body. It's the closest part of the soul to our animal nature, and it's our animation. When you get into Ruach and you get into soul, you are talking about different levels. Animals do not have neshama. Okay, that's the whole point. Only human beings have neshama, which is the breath life, which is spirit.
That's not an accurate.
There's such a huge philosophy behind all this that if you don't know that, in my opinion, you just kind of look at these scriptures very narrowly. And instead of interpreting them within the larger philosophy of what the people had, because the people who wrote these texts had philosophies. And if you don't know what it is, then in my opinion, you can't really interpret it according to the way they were writing it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense what you're saying, but it's incorrect. Genesis does state that the animals get neshama.
That's no nephesh. It's the word nephesh.
No, they get nephesh and neshama. They get both.
Which is okay. So ruach. So this is what is, and then again, this is the thing. Like you have an animal that is an insect, but then you have an animal. We know today animals have like dolphins, very smart and they communicate at very high levels. See, this is why I'm saying why reading Philo, these deep writers who understood the nuances in these words. There's huge nuance. I mean, again, you would not even in the animal world, in the soul life, because soul is really, in my opinion, it's just a category of explaining almost the computer programs, how much software the entity has. All right. Obviously, we have pretty sophisticated software. We can do things that no animal can do. But then even in the animal kingdom, you got some animals that are slugs, technically, and you have some animals that display almost human-like, sometimes even really crazy behaviors. So there's software. So even within those, that's why I don't like to be dogmatic. I just like to go for understanding. So whatever. Yes, and this is what the Hebrews and the translations are trying to get through to people. But they would have understood levels of soul life in creation. That's a fundamental, that it's not all equal. We're not all equal in soul life in the creation.
Sure, I'm not trying to say that we're all equal. I think that's some of the problem that begins to happen with the extreme vegetarian Ebionites.
Yeah, we agree there.
This idea that while we're supposed to care for animals, which I agree with, obviously, we're also supposed to treat them on the same level as humans. It kind of gets into that whole thing. So I agree we're not all equal, but to the point, animals do have both, according to Genesis, Nephesh and Neshama. So there's some, and some animals are communicating with the Father in the biblical text and in extra biblical texts. Some animals, I think that if the rocks could cry out, that certainly any animal could. But at the same time, I agree with you. But I still don't know that because we're greater than the animals, that necessarily implies that we have to migrate through history. Even if, let's go back a few years in my theology to when I would have believed that the soul was eternal. I still don't think that necessitates reincarnation. Reincarnation is just one way to explain what happens to the soul if it is in fact eternal. But again, this is all subjective, meaning it's in our mind. We're trying to figure it out, and it's not explicitly stated. If you pass away in this life, you get reborn into another body. And one of the biggest arguments talking about this, that the 1st and 2nd century, I can try to throw it up here. I took a picture out of this book here, which is a great book to have. I know I've mentioned it last time, but a Dictionary of Early Christian Beliefs. So the closer you get to 300, the more skewed they get.
Yeah.
But in talking, but there are a few quotes in here that are from the 100s and 200s. And in talking about reincarnation, their whole the whole thing is I just lost it here. The whole thing is very the idea being that every single church father, and we're talking as early as 160, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, are all saying that, number one, that the at that time the proto-Orthodox view that you are going to die once, and after that is the judgment, which I would like to get your take on Hebrews 9 there, Liz. Also, they say that reincarnation, as in you're going to come back as whatever, maybe a human, maybe not, is all against the Gnostics, and it's in all of their anti-Gnostic writings and anti-Gnostic teachings. So it's apparent to me that in the 1st and 2nd century that the idea of reincarnation was coming from Gnosticism, was coming from Greek philosophy, intermixing with some of the Christian stuff. And I didn't see any quote that was pro-reincarnation from any of the proto-church fathers. But I would like to get your take on Hebrews 9.
Sure.
Liz. What do you think about that?
I just put up did I do it? Hold on. A link. And this is one of my problems today. There's so much quote unquote spinning going on. Everybody spins things according to the way, they're perceiving it. So, here is a YouTube somebody put up where, showing how, according to church fathers, reincarnation was totally accepted. And it is in the quotes of the early church fathers, and the writings are there. And it would make sense if the Essenes do believe in reincarnation, which I think you can kind of document. In the Essenes, Nazarenes, all these people, even the Pharisees, early Christian, quote unquote, that it would have been there. So, like I said, I don't have a horse in this race. I'm just looking for, and I look at things much more philosophical, because the idea of, like you're saying, once the judgment. Now, here is a quote from the Zohar. Okay, so you were saying, it says, all souls are subject to revolutions. Gilgal, this concept. Men do not know the way they have been judged in all time. In other words, we take that verse to mean there's only one judgment. You die and you're judged, and that's it. But in Hebrew understanding, no, there are many judgments. Every time you live a life, you stand before, quote unquote, this tribunal, the judge, and you're weighed in the balances. And, if you emigrate or transmit from there. Okay, so I'm saying we give it a spin. We think that's what it's saying. But according to the Zohar, and I have in other places here, where that's not the spin they put on it. There are multiple tribunals. We're always going before, our deeds are always being weighed in the balance. So, do what you want with it. That's why I said I don't like to be dogmatic. I'm just saying, I would, so did that answer that?
I think what he said earlier about, again, after 300 BC, things really change fast. If you go back to
this is
Heraclitus, and you go back to Aristotle, that talk specifically about these logos and anima, the spirit, you're going to see that after these guys wrote and were discovered, that the Greek ideas just flew into the Hebrew ideas, and pretty much by the time we get Hellenistic Jews of the 1st century or 1st century BC, we're finding, even in the Gospel of John, almost a rewrite of what these early Greeks wrote. I'm thinking of John and the Logos, and Heraclitus, his talk about the Logos from 300 BC, and certainly Aristotle, especially in the church fathers, he is considered, along with some other ones, as proto-Christians. And so a lot of what Aristotle wrote, when he was rediscovered from the Arabic in the Middle Ages, those like Thomas Aquinas really got a hold of Aristotle's ideas on the soul. And they're a whole lot like we've just discussed right now. And I think that those are primarily Greek. I don't see the Hebrew flowing into there, but it's hard to get back that far. And when you do, you don't find anything about either resurrection or reincarnation, I don't think.
Well, can I just jump in? Rich, did you want to go next? Because I think it would be your turn. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
I have another quote here. I just want to back onto this because I knew I had one more thing to say about this Gilgal, the revolution. It says, this is another quote from the Zohar. It says, all souls are subject to transmigration, and men do not know the ways of the Holy One, blessed be he. They do not know that they are brought before the tribunal, both before and after. Brought before the tribunal both before they enter into the world and after they leave it. They are ignorant of the many transmitigations and secret probations which they have to undergo, and the number of souls and spirits which enter into this world. Now, part of this reason why you could make a case for the need for this is the concept of the purification. And especially pre-Yeshua per se, but there's the idea of a silver tried in a furnace 7 times, that there is a need for the soul, which is, like I said, there's a lot of the astral part of us, the psyche part of us, the soul is not the same as the spirit, needs purification because that's where the fall is, that's where our issues are. But I want to just take a minute, Jackson, if I can, unless you want to comment it then, and then I want to answer Jackson's thing about the Greeks.
I would have a question too while you're at it, Liz, is because you've studied it more obviously. What is, so there's certain people, the Zohar and different sources that are teaching this. So my question would be twofold. One, how do they know? And 2, what was the requirement? What did they have to pass, or what did they have to do, or what was bestowed upon them to get them to know?
Right. Wait, Jackson, don't leave because I want to talk to you. I got to answer Rich's question, but can you wait 1 minute or should I wait for you?
I just had company come in for a few minutes from out of town. I'm going to go out and then I'll come back in. Is that okay?
I would say answer it, Liz, and he'll watch it. He'll be able to watch it.
See, this is my presupposition. I will tell you this because in Deuteronomy, 28, it's very clear that Yahweh says to, Israel, look, if you obey me, if you keep my, statutes and decrees, and if you be the nation of priests and kings I want, I will make you, he says, I will make you the head and not the tail. Now, in other places, he goes on to say that, if you keep my commandments and all this, in Deuteronomy 4, I believe it's verse 5, it says, that surely if you do this, you will be a great nation, a wise and understanding people. All right. He goes on to say, in Deuteronomy 4:24, it says, wait, I thought I had another verse reiterating that, but the concept that they would, but see, I think because Israel, and of course, especially us Israelites, have not kept his commandments, the converse curses come upon us where we are the tail and not the head. There are so many verses that talk about how in the curses he would send blindness, confusion, this whole concept of groping around in the darkness, which if you apply that not into intellectual categories. So a lot of the reason we can't figure this stuff out, the calendar and a lot of this stuff has to do, again, with my sense that we are not the purified souls that we could or should be. But Jackson should, I was reading Josephus. Now, Josephus against Apion, I think that's how you say it, Apion, contra Apion, he goes on to say, and this is what you will read in the Zohar, this I have read in many, many places, in the Talmud, among the sages, different things, they believe that Israel truly is the head and not the tail. The reason the Greeks, the Babylonians, the Hindus, all these people look like they have taken Greek or have taken Hebraic theology, in other words, all of them get their original ideas from the Hebrews. We go way back to Adam. See, this knowledge comes from Adam. This is the righteous remnant. So Josephus makes the point very clear, and he talks about he talks about them. He is writing in here, and he's talking about the antiquities that the Jewish people have. The antiquities contains 5,000 years of history in their sacred books. I mean, makes no mistake about it. And I've read this over and over, and I give it to you right now in a book from, that's talking about the Kabbalah. This John Rickhulin, who is known as the father of the German Reformation, he goes on to say that he wrote a whole treatise, very popular at the time, where again, he's a Christian rediscovering Hebrew Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism, and he goes on to say and to write that all wisdom and true philosophy is derived from the Hebrews, that Plato, Pythagoras, Zoroaster borrowed their ideas from the Bible, and that traces of the Hebrew language are found in all the liturgies and sacred books of the nations. Now, this is really true. See, so what I'm saying is, in my opinion, is we need to reclaim this concept. We have the truth. The other religions that we think are imitating are really inferior imitations of the truth. And you should read Against Apion. I mean, he makes it really clear, and he goes very methodically through all the historians, through all the history, and he has quotes from Pythagoras and from Aristotle and from Plato. These people were disciples of the Hebrews, because the Hebrews were in all the ancient cities. Jackson wants to say, I'm sorry, you're not here, Jackson, that Philo was a Hellenized Jew. No, he just happened to live in a Greek city, Alexandria. But the Jews, we know this from Babylon. They always lived in ancient cities. As far as India, they were in Alexandria, they were in Babylon, they were in all these places, they were in Rome, but they always lived amongst themselves. I mean, that was the whole point. Just to assume that they lived in these cities doesn't mean that now some fringe did, of course, but the core remnant did not assimilate. I mean, that's sort of something that we've been told we have to believe, but I don't believe that's true at all. So what I'm saying is all these other religions have a concept of reincarnation because it is very ancient in Hebraic. That's mine.
Okay, and I've heard you make that argument before, and I think that you swing it just logically. This is not. I'm not usually very emotional. I just from a logical perspective, you swing it. I think all the way to the opposite end that you're saying that Jackson swings it, though. You're saying that because some of these people had mixture, that the things that they're saying aren't bad, and that we should embrace those and take them back to what they were originally intended to be. They've stolen them from us. We should not poo-poo them. We should bring all of this stuff from mysticism, excuse me, and things like this and reclaim it. The problem with that is that we don't clean it up and reclaim it. Okay. But the problem is that everything isn't from Yahweh. And even if it was, there's no way of knowing that all of these things are from Yahweh. But in every, and this is just me seeing you talk a few times and discuss a few times, every single time this comes up, you take the extreme position that, hey, we need to bring this stuff in and clean it up. But we don't have, if that's the case, if all of these things or the majority of these things or some of these things are actually from him, we don't have the descriptive text to be able to rightly do that.
Well,
So as Paul points out, you should avoid the very appearance of sin. So if it's something that you can't rightly say for sure, this is from Yahweh, you should stay away from it for your own safety. Study it out, figure it out, and if you can prove it, then absolutely. But I've not heard on any, from any scholarly source, from any, basement YouTube source, I haven't seen anything that shows that these things are explicitly from Yahweh, what we are supposed to be doing. So I take the approach, I avoid the very appearance of what I deem to be sin. Plus, I also have other writings that I see like you mentioned Zoroaster, for instance. I mean, Jubilees says that he's he got magical arts from Ham. So I also have other sources that I pull from that go against what you're saying. So not only can we not prove that some of these things are from Yahweh, but we can prove that there's writings that say that they for sure are not, that they are from the magical arts. And that's not to say that everything Zoroaster taught was evil or bad. I mean, just because Stalin says 2 + 2 is 4 doesn't mean it isn't, just because he's a bad guy. I get that. But I think that if I don't see it explicitly laid out in the words of Yeshua and the words of Yahweh through Moshe, then it's a stretch for me to say, hey, we should just try to clean these things up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can't see. We don't really disagree, Rich. Let me try to restate, because we really fundamentally don't disagree, and we agree with Josephus, in my opinion, fundamentally. Because and I really do. If anybody's interested, I think we should read Against Apion. It's one of Josephus's writings, and it's not one of his, but it's a really good historical understanding of how the knowledge of the text has gone through the ages, so to speak. But one of the things Josephus makes very clear, and this is what Yeshua says, this is all, I've always heard this from the sages, is that you shall know a tree by its fruit. And this is what Josephus says, and this is why the priests, and when he talks about how this information has been disseminated, that there has always been, and the Jews have tried their best. Have they done it perfectly? No. But they have tried their best to keep a remnant of scribal tradition and scribal priests who are holy and pure and do, walk the talk, and they do, and that these are the ones so that's why in our canon, the 22 prophets, those prophets are in the 22 books, and what I think there's 18 or 19 prophets, right? Those are people, they put their stamp on. These guys were holy. We can trust them. These are the writings that we will stick to. And so that being said, so they do have a screening process, and I believe in the scribal tradition of ancient Israel. I mean, just the fact when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found the copy of Isaiah, minimum 1900 years apart from each other, and there's like almost no error. There's just like no difference. I mean, they had a tradition that they really stuck to, and they kept the holiest, the best and the brightest and the holiest of every generation they would entrust with these sacred texts. Did they know amongst themselves who was a little nefarious? I mean, that's all part of the history. But the flip side is, in Richard, I say all this because I do believe in what you probably would call the serpent seed doctrine. I do believe in the other side, right? We're talking about holy text. So yes, Zoroaster, I've read it could have been Ham, definitely. But what they're talking about, Zoroaster, the whole concept of fire, the whole concept of what the religion is saying. And that's why I say Jewish mysticism. When you get out of the world of physicality, you're dealing in supernal worlds. Obviously, worlds that we don't access with our five senses. That's the whole point. So that's why there is comparison in some of these situations, because the same heaven, I'm assuming the same heaven that we're under is the same heaven that Hasatan is operating in, right? I mean, I don't think, right. So we're in the same kind of cosmos. So when you start talking about these things, obviously there will be similarities philosophically and different, because we're dealing with, they always use those four: air, earth, wind, and fire, as they're dealing with talking about things. But it gets back to, who are you going to trust? I do trust our Hebraic root system and the scribal tradition. Now, you have to study it really deep all the time to get the nuances and figure out what everybody's saying. Absolutely.
Liz, just as a point of reference before I respond, do you know about and or ascribe to like either the documentary hypothesis or the supplementary hypothesis or something like the JEPD idea of the Tanakh, or no?
I think to a certain extent there is some validity in it, because we are dealing with different sects, and the House of Judah was doing their best in a lot of ways to keep authentic writings from
Sure.
the different sects.
Okay, so look, real quick, I just posted this in the link. You can find for $11 it's used. It's a hardcover. Josephus, The Complete Works. It's got the one she's mentioning in it, plus a bunch of others. It's a decent book. So $12 you can get that book. Anyway, so I would say then, Liz, if you do see at least a general agreement with the documentary hypothesis that there are multiple sects, multiple groups trying to push forward their version of the truth of the Torah and the prophets and all of that and the history,
Well,
that just in general, that then, and I've heard even one good friend of mine kind of makes the statement that you're making, hey, the house of Judah was the one that was prescribed to make sure that these words got passed on. We need to defer to them. And I agree in a sense, but that doesn't mean everything that got passed in through the house of Judah is correct. It means,
no, I'm
so
not
from
saying
the
that.
idea that, okay, and I'm just saying that for everybody else out there. So the same idea of the seed, right? The sower sowed the seed, and that was I mean, I'm not a serpent seed guy, but this would even go in with your serpent seed theology. Then the evil one came and sowed other seed. And so we can't just take all of the seed that grows, all of the words that comes out of the mouth of all of those seeds, because some of those seeds are bad. And they're intermixed in the same field. And I think that's important that a lot of Christians don't understand. They're just taking the books that they've been given, and everything in here is just perfect and awesome. And the theology I was raised on is awesome, especially if I haven't ever changed churches and I'm in the same denomination. I know less and believe it more. But anyway, and this idea that everything that's given, because it comes from the house of Judah, which I would also argue that everything that says it's from the house of Judah isn't, but that's a whole nother subject that we can't get into today, because that would start, Jeremy'd start talking and we'd never get out here. Is that there are different words coming out of these different seeds. And like I said, especially if you believe in the serpent seed doctrine, it's even more so than how I would see it, that you have to parse out what is of the Father and what isn't. And I think that, are there some things that we currently don't believe that Liz is referring to that maybe we should believe? Yeah, I think probably there are, because of the way, we don't realize that most of us here in this group are from Western Catholicism. Matter of fact, Eastern Orthodox, you know what they call Protestants? They call Protestants hyper-Catholics. Meaning they're just on the other side of the Catholic debate that we are. We rebelled against him in, 1090, what it was, 1090 something, 1095, 1092, 1094, something like that. And they rebelled against him in the 16th century. So we think Western, no matter what. I was having a conversation with Jeremy. When was it, Jeremy? Thursday. And we were discussing the idea of the influence of Paul. And I said, we were raised in Protestant American churches. It doesn't matter if you and I tomorrow and woke up and thought Paul was the Antichrist. We would still think in a Pauline way, because it's so pushed into us. Every gospel truth, every philosophical way of thinking comes from the letters of Paul when you're in a church like that. And so even if you wake up one day and think that he's not the greatest guy in the world, you still think that way because he's the one that taught you. And so we're Western. We think philosophically. That's why you go to the Bible bookstore and there's 7 steps to your freedom and 4 steps to healing and 12 steps to becoming rich. And it's a philosophical way of doing things. And the Eastern, a lot of times you can just tell the difference. An easy way to tell if something is Eastern or not, this isn't always the case, but if it's read right to left, it's an Eastern thought. If it's read left to right, then it's Western thought. And so the idea that I would agree with Liz, she didn't say this, but I think she's saying, she's implying this in general, is that we think we need to, we can't take Hebraic ideas and think of them with a Western mind. We need to think of them with the way that they were presented. It's called emic, E-M-I-C. It's emic thought. You have to take the thought of the group that was saying it and figure it out that way. And you can't, and when you have gaps, you can't fill in the gaps with your Western answer, because it will probably 99% of the time it wouldn't have been that answer. So, but again, and I don't know, Liz, maybe you're just more outspoken, and to me, it's a little more cavalier than I would be, if that's a good word for it. I'm a lot more cautious about it, but I agree with Liz. It doesn't matter if I believe in it or not. If I'm following Yahweh, and if I'm following Torah, and I'm doing good works, and I'm trying to be more like Yeshua each and every day, that's what matters. And so so that's a central tenet. What I'm saying right now is a central tenet of probably everybody in this group. Now, I think I could do pretty well to say that reincarnation isn't going to happen or hasn't happened in the past, but that doesn't mean I'm going to part ways with somebody who thinks it. I just think they're wrong, and they think I'm wrong, or whatever. No, but
Well, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm not the kind of person where you have to be right or wrong. See, I just think when you get into these are deep things that we need to study out. I mean, what's wrong with thoroughly vetting? See, to be Berean.
Why do we need to study it out? What's the purpose of studying it out if we can't?
Well, if I'm a researcher and I want to have an intelligent conversation with someone, I should at least have some research nuanced understanding of the topic. So yes, reincarnation is something that is very much in Jewish, one of the tenets of many Jewish sects. It is. I mean, so sure. I'd like to know what they're saying and what their scriptural verses would be, how they're viewing it. So that's all I'm saying. When we get there, when you talk about the supernal realms, it's very difficult because none of us have been there,
Right.
We're doing the best we can with language, with words which are symbols, but again, I agree with you. You cannot have a Western mindset. Somehow we're dealing with a very Occidental mindset, which is very different in the way they view language, the way words are used as symbols. The whole thing the Jews view there is very different from a latter-day Western Christian, evangelical perspective. So, at least you got to know all that going in. So,
absolutely. Well, does anybody have any questions at all or any comments? Did you hear anything and you wondered, hey, where's that source or what's that? I know, I think somebody was asking something on the chat, but does anybody have anything they want to ask or throw in from their studies? Or a question or anything? No. So where does everybody stand? Is everybody more traditional Orthodox view, or not maybe Orthodox view, but certainly not reincarnation? There's an eternal life. And where does everybody stand on it? Dennis?
Well, could you discuss Hebrews 9:27? I know that was brought up before, and I'd just like to get a vetting on that verse and the different opinions about that verse. Which says it is appointed to man once to die, and then after that the judgment. I mean, what are the different views on that verse?
Liz, do you have anything?
Well, I told you two quotes from the Zohar explaining the way they look at that there is, every time a soul comes in and out, there is a tribunal. So they're not saying it's a one-time gift from from the sages' minds who pen these works. They do not interpret that verse to mean that there is only one judgment. See, a lot of these things are how
the Zohar wouldn't ascribe to Hebrews anyway, right? They're not trying to.
Well, I'm not talking about Hebrews, the book of the Bible. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about they do not. I just quoted you that they do not know that they are brought before the tribunal both before they enter into the world and after they leave it, and they are ignorant of the many transmitigations and secret probations which souls undergo. So in other words, to them, that verse is not implying a one-time only. That's what I'm saying.
No,
implying every time your soul would be weighed in the balances.
Wait a minute, but you're trying to make the case that the writer of Hebrews would agree with the Zohar.
No, I'm not. I didn't bring Hebrew. I didn't know. I'm just No, I didn't. I just
So
said,
you're
I'm giving
putting
it to you. I'm just quoting it. What
what the Zohar says.
the Zohar says. Okay.
So
So,
you then
what
put
I'm
more.
saying is that verse does not have to be interpreted the way we, quote unquote, evangelically would interpret it. And in fact, Jewish sages did not interpret it that way. I'm just giving you the evidence.
Okay, so then, in your personal opinion, do you put more weight? Do you think that the Zohar, that Hebrews 9:27 should be interpreted in light of the Zohar?
I didn't say that. I told you.
I'm asking, do you
Well,
believe that or not?
I don't know that I'm ready to say that one way or the other. I mean, like I told you in the beginning of this, I don't have a horse in this race. I'm not going to come out one way. It doesn't, to me right now, it's not an essential doctrine per se. I'm interested in researching it out from many different angles. And I do read extensively in the Jewish Zohar, so I do know what I'm talking about. Okay, if you've never read the Zohar, if you still have a negative attitude towards it, then that's going to color whether or not you put any validity into it.
You know what I would say, if you read around, and I hadn't done this before, I was just reading it as you were talking. If you read around the verses of Hebrews 9:27, if you read 26 and 28, that I think you could make a case that it is saying you only live once and die once, because it says, for then he would had to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. So it's already using the word repeatedly. But as it is, he who appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself, we would all agree that he only died once, to sacrifice of himself. And just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. So I would say that it does mean, in fact, and I mean, we'd have to look, it'd be good for Jackson to look it up in the Greek, but from this rendering in the, probably I'm on the ESV, that it would have to mean that man lives once and dies once only, because it's saying it's coming into context with Yeshua living and Yeshua only dying once. It says in the same way, man only lives and dies once, but Yeshua is coming back a second time. So it almost like hedges it in. So I would definitely say that that's not the same understanding as the Zohar. And then it would just depend upon your personal, idea. Do you believe the Zohar more than Hebrews? Some people in these circles don't even believe Hebrews is inspired. So I don't
all over the place people are. I mean,
right. So I don't take that view at all. I like Jackson's idea, which is even more. So that's even more. So Jackson says, or at least posits the idea that the book of Hebrews was written to the Essenes to show them that their idea of Melchizedek is the same as Yeshua, that Yeshua is, and that's why he puts Yeshua as Melchizedek. And so, which is an interesting proposition to me, and it makes it even more interesting if there was some Essenic idea of reincarnation, and then he lays it down that, hey, you're appointed once. So he's almost like trying to make a point, you're appointed once to die, and after that, the judgment. That would even be more apropos, in my opinion. And it would also explain why he waits till chapter 9 to say it. Maybe he wants to sink a few hooks in them first, and then say some things that they might not agree with. But he starts off pretty good in 1 and 2, going with how he's above the angels. But anyway,
right. But then in the context, the larger context is, I could rebuttal back, is this is Yeshua in his prophecies as as the Son of Man. I'm sure most people do not think that Yeshua has only. See, like if anybody is, I have a piece I'm looking for here, like a shapeshifter. This is one way in which, all right, so there's certain prophecies about Yeshua that he had to fulfill as the Son of Man. Doesn't mean that he doesn't have other, that he only.
I would never ascribe shapeshifter to Yeshua. I would think that.
You see, this is where people don't understand. Like angels, when they come, that's a modern word. Okay, I know shapeshifting, it probably, but it's a modern word to explain. When an angel comes into manifestation, right? He
No.
comes as a human being.
No,
That means he
shape-shifting
shifted
is
his-
the idea even that a human could shift into something else through magical powers.
Well, this is after the resurrection, Yeshua did. I mean, it's very obvious. He appeared as the gardener to Mary Magdalene, and then walking through
But
walls.
shapeshifter is a negative.
Well, I know it is to you. But a lot of times I don't.
No, it's negative.
Give
in
me a better
general.
word. Then give me a different word. All right.
A theophany.
Okay. He appeared in different, even in the Old Testament when he appeared, right?
Yes, I mean the Ebionites wouldn't ascribe to this, but
right.
sure.
So I don't mind the word shapeshifter. If it offends you, I apologize ahead of time. All right. It just helps me because I understand molecularly how you have to rework the whole molecular, depending on which dimension you're going into. I mean,
Sure, but if you're like going on YouTube and saying shapeshifter, you're going to get a lot of people that are not savory.
I know, but where I'm at I can't help people get offended at anything. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about people getting offended because they're going to get offended if they're going to get offended and whatever. But one of the interesting things is that, because the point is, it doesn't matter to me. In other words, why would when people have an orthodoxy that we cannot concretely nail down, because orthodoxy leads to fundamentalism, and fundamentalism can really lead to some very bad fruit. All right. And historically it has. I just err on the side for people who think that these are concepts that we can explore from different perspectives of holy men. I mean, I don't think people are going to argue that the Essenes were extremely holy people. So we're not talking about, unless you ascribe to Gary Wayne and they're Luciferians, whatever. But if you ascribe the Essenes are holy men, these are holy people that have a theology about something. So it doesn't freak me out to explore it. And I can see places where verses can be used to describe or to be interpreted in that way. And early church fathers, in everything we've said, Rich, I can document early church fathers. If you look at the YouTube I put up, so it's all good in my opinion.
I have a question for Rick.
Yeah, what's up?
When you mentioned about Enoch, the possibility that John the Baptist was Enoch reincarnated.
Elijah. Sorry.
Elijah. I mean, that's right. Elijah didn't see death. So could that be a form of reincarnation that would be compatible with Hebrews 9?
Yeah. First of all, I don't ascribe to the idea that John the Baptist was actually Enoch. I don't ascribe to that. I was just pointing out that was the only argument I could find anywhere that Yeshua believed in reincarnation from any pseudo-Christian reincarnation websites. So that was just pointing that out. To me, that was pointing out they don't have a bunch of information. But no, I think that first of all, even if it was, let's just hypothesize for a minute that it was Elijah. It says that he did that maybe as a special envoy. It doesn't say that we're all supposed to do that. And so it would be similar to saying, wives, submit to your husbands. It doesn't mean every woman has to submit to every man. She has the choice to marry. And then if she marries, then she's supposed to submit to her husband. It's in that same way. Maybe it was for this one time, or maybe it was, like you said, because he didn't die and then he's able to come back. And of course you have the Mount of Transfiguration. So there are exceptions to rules. No doubt. Think of the Torah as fatherly instructions. So, for instance, if we're going out tonight, and I'm going to tell my kids, don't answer the door for anybody, and don't blah 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 blah, and this and that, all of that. But then if Jeremy and his wife are driving by our house as they're babysitting and they get into a car accident and they need to call the police and they see it's Jeremy knocking on the door, they're going to let Jeremy and his wife in. So so they would not be breaking my instructions, because my instructions were for their good, right? There's a verse in Deuteronomy, for your good always. These are instructions for your good always. So in that way, there are exceptions to the rule. David can take the bread sometimes when it's for the priest if he's going to starve and die. You can do some work if your house is on fire on a Sabbath, and you can try to extinguish it. It's not breaking the Torah, even though you're not supposed to work on Torah. So there are exceptions to the rule. Could the Elijah John thing be an exception? Sure. I don't think it is, for the idea that either Elijah didn't die and then he's able to come back and then he gets beheaded, or for the idea that it wasn't Elijah, it was just a type and a shadow, a person like Elijah, similar to what Moshe said, there will be a prophet like me from among you who comes. It doesn't mean Yeshua is Moses. It means he's like him, and he's going to have some of the same traits as him. They're going to have 70 followers, and they're going to he's going to hold the serpent up, and he's going to, just different things like that. I put a list on one of the Yahad think tank arguing for Yeshua being like Moses. You could look at it there. But anyway, does that kind of answer your question, Dennis?
Yeah, I mean, it leaves the door open. I mean, there's situations like not Elijah, but Enoch coming back as one of the two witnesses in Revelation. I mean, that possibility. I mean, how would he be coming back in the same body that he had when he walked in the seventh from Adam?
Well, since I have talked to Yahweh about this personally, I will tell you, no, I haven't. Yeah, I mean, that's all speculative. That's all subjective. There's a lot of stuff about Enoch that is not in the canon proper. If you haven't read at least First Enoch, I would suggest reading it. That's the only thing I would suggest. There's a lot of other stuff out there. I would say, too, that it's possible that he didn't die, and then, First Enoch says he didn't die and he came back down.
Right.
And so it doesn't necessarily say, it says Elohim there when it says, and Enoch walked with Elohim and he was not, for Elohim took him. It's just as grammatically correct in the Hebrew to say that and Enoch walked with the messengers, the angels, the watchers, and was not, because the messengers took him. So that's just as legitimate of a translation. That doesn't fit into orthodoxy, so you don't get that translation, which is kind of a mind-blowing translation when you read First Enoch and realize that's probably what it does mean. But anyhow, as to
Let me jump in on that, Rich, if you want.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, because see, this is you just said the messengers. Even when Yeshua said, "As you see me go, so shall you see me come," and he talks about the clouds. Now I know that's a euphemistic. That's a parabolic way of talking about the angels. Clouds are angels. There's masses of angels. This is so in one sense, I mean, they both can fit. This is what I'm trying to say. When you get into the supernal realms, all right, Yeshua's going to heaven. Enoch went to heaven, or they said to paradise, all right? He's leaving his physical body, and he is to his soul, which is the higher program anyways, is moving up into a different dimensions. And the angels, this is, I think you can make the case, angels are kind of conduits. They sort of lead, right? They lead people back and forth from the different dimensions. I mean, that's even Isaiah or Paul, they always had angel messengers when they went, so to speak, into different dimensions to get a vision or see the throne room or whatever. But I would, if I was to subscribe to anything in this concept, I would say that there is, for highly, and I'm evolved souls, I don't know what other words to use, because or souls that are very purified. If on the flip side, it says that there are many antichrists, like if we're in a war, let's just put it that way, and we know that the Bible text says there's many antichrists, which means there are many. To be able to look at Hasatan has souls, or he has souls on his end. We know that he can, whether he possesses fully or the person is given over and they are inhabited by a demonic soul life kind of. All right, so there are many antichrists. He has ways on the flip, if that's true on that side, you'd have to turn the coin over. And does Yeshua, is there a concept that, and this is what I do see more in the Zohar, and I said, for very, like Hinduism and they take it down into such base levels where you can come back as an ant or a plant. I mean, I don't really see that. I see this more as, this is a war, the sons of light and the sons of darkness. This is an extremely intense battle that's going on for the souls of men. And does Yahweh have a right to reserve souls that he wants to use? Enoch and Elijah. I mean, there is this hint in the text, is what I'm saying. And if you follow Pards, which is a form of Jewish exegesis, there's a literal level, but then there's the hint. There's a level called Ramaz where deeper things are hinted at. You have another level called Drash where, sort of the moral of the story. And then you have another level, and this is highly documented, called the Sud level, where there really is a hidden mystery. And this whole topic we're talking about is a very Sud level understanding, because there's some really deep stuff we're talking about, right? So but that's why, I don't think, in terms of orthodoxy, and I see, to me, those are triggers of, why do we have to just throw it out? Can't we just think deeply and largely? Because I have a feeling that I always believe that discernment is what's needed. I trust the Ruach in me. I trust greater is Yeshua's ability to keep me than the devil's ability to deceive me. That's what I believe, because I'm a child. If I'm in Torah and I am keeping the commandments to the best of my ability, I would rather err on the favor of grace, that he can direct me, than always being fearful that there's a demon behind every single theology out there, which, in a certain sense there is. But so I'm saying that this thing had me looked at from many, many deep, deep angles. And when you talk about the transfiguration, that's probably one of the most mystical events we have in all of the texts, where you have Yeshua all of a sudden transformed. Now, I said the word shapeshifting, and I use that word in the sense of all of a sudden he became his pre-incarnator, who is the light bearer. Yeshua's light, right? He's the light of the world. So he became a light being. And if you look at the words in the Strong's 3339, it's a compound word, but he morphed into a form that embodies his inner essence, which is light. That's what he is. So he became, that's why it says in the text, sometimes I know the translators have a hard time trying to find words to express what they're trying to express, because, he's transformed. He's this light being in front of them. And then you see Moses and Elijah, I believe, right? And they are also transfigured, and they are also light beings. So in this soul, so there you're seeing this whole dimension where these guys are, or they have access to, which again, to me is in terms of the immortality of the soul, that they're, these are things that are rather immortal. So I'm saying when a lot of these concepts are very deep, so then you take it into the concept of Yeshua when he is telling us, or Paul is telling us, until Christ be formed in you. This concept of formed and fashioned, shaped or made, it is this kind of word of transformed or morphed, or there's a continual, we're being molded and shaped and formed. And a lot of this is a concept, does it always happen in just one life? We know, we're told, if we are sons of the light, we are sons of Elohim, we are of the highest order, we're Israel. We are of the essence of the Father, which is breath. There's nothing higher. So that is our essence. So if we're falling all the way down here and, gross darkness and with all this dross, and we have to be cleansed, I guess I ask you, why do you have to say, what propels you to say that it has to be done in one lifetime? Now, I'm not talking about you coming back as a planter. I'm saying, if you are truly a son of Elohim, and I feel like even in my life, I fall short. So it's in his mercy. Do you know that in Gematria, Jewish, numbers, the word Gilgal has the same numerical value as the word kindness. And it's really a kindness. See, that's why the Jews looked at it, that it was a kindness of the Father that he gives us a couple shots at this.
Yeah. I don't think that, the word Gilgal has the same as the word kindness. Is that with or without extra vowel that's put in to make the word pronounceable.
Hesed, which is the word kindness, has the same gematria as the word Gilgal. So I guess if you took the Hebrew letters and counted them up, gave them their numeric value, and kind of, that whole process.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, first of all, I would push back on your argument that, hey, God's grace is big enough to hold me, and I can go exploring wherever. I don't have to worry about a demon behind everything. I would look at that in the opposite way. I would look to when the disciples said, "Teach us to pray," and he said, "When you pray, pray like this: lead us not into temptation." He's saying you need to pray to the Father that He doesn't lead you into temptation. Now that's a huge statement to make in the basic prayer that he says to pray. That's a lot different from going out and exploring everything, not at his behest, but at your own behest, and saying, his grace will take me.
You're assuming that's what I'm doing. You're assuming that my foundation is not that he's leading me. See, I believe he's leading me. You're
okay. Well, that's what I was asking before. Do you believe this stuff? And you would say, I can't ascribe to that. So I don't know. I don't know from.
Put me in a box, Rich, and it's not necessary.
Well, I've put myself in a box saying I don't believe in reincarnation.
That's fine.
Right. So you have the whole time just presented this point of view, and every time I've heard you talk about the subject, this is the only point of view you present. And so it just makes sense that you would believe it. I'm surprised that you don't say you believe it. But
I'm not, a lot of times with people, I might believe something while I'm exploring it. It's like the pendulum swinging. Since I'm exploring it, I'm looking at it. I'm going, that's interesting. But give me a good rebuttal as to why, what would be a better reason, what would show Yah's loving kindness more? The fact that he would give the righteous souls, the souls that have been preordained from before the foundations of the world, that he knows, a couple of shots at it, or just one shot. Now, from the point of view of loving kindness, you try to convince me it's more loving to give somebody one shot, or you're out, or a bunch of tries at something.
Yeah. First of all, I would say that we would divulge at the very beginning at the serpent seed doctrine. The idea that certain beings have no shot, certain human beings have no shot at heaven is Calvinism, is early Calvinism.
I didn't say that. I just said, going on the verse, that he knows us from before the foundations of the world. That's the basic premise, right? The child of light, the son of daughter of Elohim, whose name is in the book of life. It wasn't an accident. He knew us from before the foundation of the world. So that's who we're talking about, which, yeah. So
I think it's unfair to exclude that whole other group in the serpent seed doctrine. I think that is completely the antithesis of what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that how much more, it's so much more awesome that that he would give us multiple chances to make it in. And I'm saying, yet you believe in the serpent seed doctrine where certain humans can't make it in.
Right,
so
because,
it's not.
See, understand, it's perspective. The only reason Yah knows the beginning from the end. I don't know if see. So from his perspective, he can say that because he knows the beginning from the end. We don't know if we finally. All right, so we're going on the premise that I don't really know. So just.
Sure. I'm just saying that I think there's a difference between him looking ahead and knowing who's ultimately written in the book of life. It doesn't mean he's making them be or forcing them to be or anything. It just means he knows. He has that knowledge.
Right.
Whereas the serpent seed doctrine states that there is an offshoot of the human race that are basically born of the serpent seed, and that they can't make it to heaven.
No, that's not what it says. No, I guess you must not. No. It says in the text that there are certain vessels that are fitted for destruction. There are certain players in this thing. Like he even says about Pharaoh, there are certain people that he places. And that's another whole very interesting concept. But no, everyone, especially anyone of Abraham's seed, everyone has a shot. That's especially in this is why the time of the Gentiles. So awesome.
According to your understanding of the serpent seed, did Cain have a shot?
Absolutely. That's what Yahweh said to him. So look at.
So who is Cain's father?
Oh, well, I don't. You would know my answer, but I don't want to do.
Well, then answer.
Well,
You're making the argument. Answer the question. Who was Cain's
Rich,
father
I
according
don't
to
want to
you?
be taken down. I want my original question flushed out. I don't want to go to these.
That's what I'm doing. I'm showing
want
you
you
that
to
your
try-
idea that the grace is your version is that God's grace is better than my version doesn't hold up when you look at the facts. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to show you that that's incorrect logically.
No. So what if Cain had many opportunities to come back and maybe and finally, you know, out of 4 out of 5 times, and I mean, who knows, math, he gets it right. What's again, there again, is it more kind to give, you know, it says for, what does it say, that through patience, that's what Peter is saying, you know, look at, you think he's taken forever to come back, but it's really the mercy and the patience and the goodness of Elohim that he's waiting. What's he waiting for? Everybody to get as many tries as they all need to get to, so that before the justice, you know, the courts of heaven, he's perfectly just. You know, there's what I like about the Jewish mind is that they really do think from every angle, you know, and yeah, let's put ourselves in a court of law and let's try to make Yahweh as just as he can be. And let's look at the argument from that point of view.
Sure, but that's still just a man-made construct of what they think Yahweh is. It doesn't mean that's who Yahweh is.
He's justice. That's one of his attributes. He's a
Right.
God of perfect justice.
Absolutely. But just because I have to fit that into my paradigm, that would be, in my mind, what you were talking about earlier, the actual working definition, if not the literal definition of the word fundamentalism. Fundamentalism in the actual way it's used today is this idea that I think about God a certain way, so then I must make every text fit into that idea of Elohim, and that is fundamentalism. And I think that's what that would be doing. If you're like, hey, let's think about him this way, well, you're still putting him in the box of your subjective mind rather than letting him tell you who he is. So
well, that's what you're doing with trying to make
I'm saying he does
an unorthodox doctrine. Yeah,
I'm saying that he does not. It's no. For instance, so when Yeshua or when Moshe was talking, Numbers 12 explains it. Moshe is to be heard over every other prophet because why? In Numbers 12, because he is easy to understand. He talks to Yahweh face to face. He's not like other prophets that prophesy in riddles and dreams, right? So what do we have when we look at prophets that prophesy in riddles and dreams? Ezekiel's the wheel within a wheel. We've got 100 different books on what that means, right? Because nobody knows, because it's not plain. When we hear about Yeshua and the prophet who's going to be like Moses in Deuteronomy 18, why do we listen to him? Because he speaks every word that the Father speaks. Listen and hearken, Shema. Do the words that he tells you to do. And you can only do those words under the same guise because they're easy to understand. So when somebody is asked, hey, what about eternal life? He doesn't say, hey, look, it's not really eternal life like you think. It's reincarnation. He doesn't say that. He says, follow the commandments. And he lists 6 of the 10 commandments. Honor your father and mother. Don't murder. Don't commit adultery. He goes through the 6, right? So the idea being that the more clear and the more basic that a prophet speaks, then the more you listen to him. Yeshua is number 1, Moshe is number 2, then the other prophets, and then the writings, and that would include the Zohar, the Talmud, Paul's letters, Peter's letters, Jude. All of those are on a level that's below Yeshua and the prophets. So since Yeshua and the prophets do not succinctly delineate reincarnation, that is why I reject it. That's my answer.
Well, fine, because we know the word reincarnation is not in the text. It's not a Jewish word. It's not a Hebrew word.
Sure.
Okay, so you would have to look
and
for the words
Gilgal,
that are Hebrew.
Neshama is not in the Hebrew text either of the canon proper. It's not in Yeshua's words in the Greek, and it's not in Moshe's words.
Wait, I didn't hear what word you said.
Gilgal Neshama, the Hebrew term for the rolling of the soul, that's not in the text.
Well, Gilgal is. I mean, that's
Sure.
that is a very
Sure, but that's a word that doesn't have anything to do with reincarnation when it's used by itself.
That's your opinion. I'm just saying, Rich. I
No,
mean,
that's not my
in my opinion. Yes, there are plenty of texts, Hebraic texts amongst the different sects that use that word towards reincarnation.
Yeah, but just because it's used doesn't mean it has to do with reincarnation. That's what I'm saying.
No, they use it as a word
Oh, sure, absolutely.
in the discussion of reincarnation.
But the word Gilgal
back to
attached to
my
the word
original-
neshama is not in the canon
But
prophecy.
back to my original question, if you were going to try to convince me to your POV, which whatever, I want to know why, in terms of for loving kindness, why do you think it presents, from your point of view, Yahweh's being more loving kind to give you one shot at it as opposed to many?
I don't think that necessarily Yahweh is being more loving kind. I think he's balancing the justice, and where it says he has justice and mercy kiss, or the prophets say that he has justice and mercy kiss. You're looking at it strictly from a grace, mercy, love aspect, and it's not just from a grace, mercy, love aspect. There also has to be the justice and judgment side of it. At some point in time, are his mercies new every morning? Absolutely. But in some point in time, you've got to come calling for the deeds you have done. And if you don't come calling for that, then he will not be being just to the people who did it correctly. So aside from my answer that I just previously gave, which I think answers it as well, that Yeshua and Moshe don't speak of it.
Well,
this idea that it only has to be justice and mercy and love, and that's what defines it. So let's create a subjective construct that gives us the most justice and mercy and love, and that to you means reincarnation, or
all right,
possible.
so you're putting words in my mouth, Rich, but let's flip it around.
Then I wouldn't agree with that.
Well, then let's talk about it from the justice point of view. You understand that's the left side and the right side. We're talking about, his loving kindness and his tender mercy, which is on one side, and his justice and his judgment. That's another reason why that reincarnation appeals in many sects, because of the justice. Because if people do heinous things, and then they come back and that heinous thing is done to them. See, there are many ways in which this could play out, either from the
a parable already deals with
the point of view of loving kindness.
So the parable of the guy who owed the king money, the king forgave him, and then he went on the street and did not give forgiveness to the guy, and then the king heard about it and threw him in jail, right? That didn't require reincarnation.
Until he paid the,
Right, that doesn't require reincarnation. That happened in his same lifetime.
But it could happen, but it doesn't preclude it.
But what is your argument that it has to happen in reincarnation? Is Yahweh not big enough to do it in one lifetime?
I just told you. And many times, because in a lot of ways, from the point of view here, life is very arbitrary. There are many situations where people just don't have access to retribution, to a loving kindness. This explains, from the Jewish point of view, they'll say it explains a lot of things: why children die in their youth, why bad things happen to good people, all ththose questions, that we always wonder, why do some people have so much and other people have so little? If these
you're saying your
concepts about life have been dealt with and answered by the sages and many writers through a process of Gilgal or transmitigation of souls. That's all I'm telling you.
So are you arguing?
That's there.
Are you arguing for the idea then that everything that happens to you in this present world must be meted out and justified again in this present world, or do you leave open the idea that that in an eternal existence he could mete out that punishment and or reward?
So say that again one more time, maybe a little clearer. So
sorry. I was just saying, you're taking the idea that anything that happens to you in this present world, if justice and mercy are going to kiss, it has to be fixed in this present world, and so that's why reincarnation would thus be a possibility, or maybe in your mind a probability.
Well, I'm just saying, you want to say that if perfect justice and mercy need to be played out in one lifetime, right?
And the eternal expanse, right? There's an eternity too.
See, Rich, all right, and I will have to probably be wrapping this up soon. I know that there's a lot of things that are very deep and mystical and don't have, in my opinion, it behooves us better to be more penetrating, all right, than dogmatic. Because I look at Israel, they had texts that they read that we certainly don't read today. I mean, they were very fluent in the book of Enoch. They had a lot of texts that we don't have access to, and they still believe some of these things. So to me, I would err on the fact that these people had worldviews and understandings and read texts on a much, I think, a higher level of understanding than most of us as quote unquote really evangelical Ephraimites do. And it would behoove us to just spend a little more time trying to understand the mindset of our ancients and our patriarchs. And it doesn't make me unorthodox in my opinion, because in terms of the things that are orthodoxy, that Yeshua is the name, know their name, the things that we agree on, we do agree on, and these things can be explored and discussed, and people have their own interests. I mean, this might not interest a lot of people. So I don't,
right. Good
you're
cap.
not going to
That's
put
good.
me in a box and have me go one way or the other. I think it's worth exploring. And
Well, I'm not putting you in a box, but you don't go one way or the other. You just go the one way. But anyway, Jackson, you've been sitting there the whole time listening intently. What did you think of the whole thing? What's your verdict?
Well, I can't really put a verdict in. What I do think is that this discussion certainly elicited a lot of good comments, and that it is something that, well, it's not like we're on the same page here, because I think what we need, and I missed a lot of it. I'm afraid Marcille came by here on her way to Miami, but need some
I said hi.
we need some texts, for me anyway, to show me that the Greeks learned everything from the Hebrews. Because what I'm seeing is that, as I mentioned before, that after 300 BC, Hebrew thought changed radically. And I looked at Philo this week on Reincarnation. The stuff I read there, from I was hoping an objective viewpoint, just seemed like nonsense to me. I mean, where did he get these concepts at? It's as though they sprung from his mind, and not just taking him as an example, but we understanding things to be correct because they're ancient sometimes. How can we know what's correct at this point? Unless it's like Luke chapter 15 or 16, unless somebody actually comes back from the dead and tells us. And we can't even trust that, really. This is a process. It's a process of getting on the same page. Now, I don't know that it's possible or not, but I think that when you start putting foundations in like this, at least we could go through and analyze and make some decisions what the ground rules are. So that's what I think. I don't believe in reincarnation, just because I don't think it's equitable, especially the kind that's taught by Hinduism. But as Liz said, what she's getting is not from pagan scriptures, but from totally Hebrew perspective. So we ought to be able to track that down.
Right. Jackson, can I just jump in? I'm sorry. Oh, I wish I knew Michelle. I hope you had told Marcille that I send.
She said she stuck her head in there. She didn't know whether, but you were going at it pretty good at that time.
Well, you and I have to have a discussion about this, and because you left the room when you listened to the recording, whole thing, the case I'm making, that yes, Josephus is very clear against Apion, contra Apion, how he says that the Jews do have the original understanding, and that all the other nations got it from them. This is a premise. To me, if we could come to that understanding, that would be a basis, to me at least, of a starting point, because
somewhat difficult.
I'm pretty much convinced of that.
Josephus is a very biased writer.
But it's not just Josephus that says that.
And he knows that, that he twists some of these concepts in order to appeal to his audience, which
Okay.
now if we could get back to the Slavonic Josephus and get that whole thing, or that's a translation of the Aramaic Josephus, what he writes to Jews, we can maybe track that down. What's published on that is just basically stuff that he says about biblical topics, but
Well, if you
that
haven't
would
read
be
it
a
lately,
place
read
to start. We could start with Heraclitus, 500 BC, actually. Now we can go and look and see what was going on in biblical lore about that same time. I just don't know. Let me listen to this. I'm trying to have an open mind here. And besides, I'm not the judge. Rachel is going to be the judge. We're going to hire her to do it.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Sure. Talking about Cain, I know some people think that he is from the seed of the serpent. I don't personally. I believe Adam was his father. That's my opinion. But the father did tell him that he can overcome sin, that he needs to, what was the English word? To dominate over sin. So he gives us the way. Even the New Covenant tells us about this. And I don't understand, why are we seeking so many things on mysteries like that? We may never know the answer.
Well, that's part of kind of what's fun in what we do. We are trying to plumb the depths a little bit and get into this ancient literature, and I think that we're all trying our hardest to do right and see right. But I think I just contradicted what I said a little bit ago about ancient literature. Anyway, you're here, Rachel. You're here and you're interested. And you even put some comments up here. So that's why. It's just a pastime and interest. We're doing exactly the same things as these philosophers and proto-scientists did in their time. We're probably not all that much smarter, maybe not as smart if we're going to look to them for that, but that's what we're doing, digging. Now we just have to wait for more texts to pop up from the ground, which anytime now they should. They're coming up all the time, and if there are to be found, we're going to find them because we're all looking. Okay, does that satisfy you until next week?
You're talking to me?
Anybody, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we spent a good hour and a half. So
Okay,
there's some good stuff if you post it, on some of the things and let some people make some comments on it, or
yeah, for sure. I'll put it right up on YouTube, and then what I have to do for the audio portion for the radio thing is to, of course, edit it down to 50 minutes each. This will make a good 2 or 3 shows. I've got still some left over from last week's that I needed to put some more with, and so I'll probably put 3 of them up from this one. Thank you all for participating. Let's do it again next week.
hopefully you have some good reincarnation themed music for the beginning and the end.
Oh, definitely. Didn't I have it for the beginning this time? Some excellent music? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, goodbye all.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Yep. Shabbat shalom, all.